Okay, John, let's look now at a question that's been submitted from the Pro-Yes, the Pro-Independence website, Newsnet Scotland, and a similar question from Ranald Dodds. Newsnet Scotland are asking, does Professor Curtice accept that the recently published British Social Attitudes Survey that asked about nuclear weapons was poorly worded, in that the Scottish question asked about nuclear weapons submarines, and thus by including the word submarines may not in fact have resulted in an accurate opinion on whether Trident should remain in Scotland after a yes vote? And Ranald similarly was saying, when asking questions on attitudes across national boundaries, is it usual practice to omit a word or words, say nuclear for example, from the question depending on which country in which the question is being asked?
Okay, let's give a bit of context to this. British and Scottish social attitudes, which I'm involved in 2013 asked questions on both sides of the border of relevance to the independence debate. And what we were particularly interested in was trying to establish what were the views of people in Scotland and south of the border, in terms of what should happen should Scotland vote yes, and equally also what were their views about what should happen should Scotland vote no. Now clearly one of the crucial issues that will face both countries if Scotland decides to vote yes is whether or not Britain's nuclear weapons facility should remain on the Clyde or not. Now to get at this we actually did two things. The first thing we did was indeed, we said, well, the first thing we need to be able to understand is what indeed are people's views about the principle of having nuclear weapons in general. So on both sides of the border, we asked the same question in which we said to people, roughly paraphrasing, do you agree or disagree that the United Kingdom should have nuclear weapons? In Scotland, that found, in line with most opinion poll evidence, a narrow majority against, i.e. it's less than 50%, but slightly more people said they disagreed with the idea of Britain being a nuclear weapon power than disagreed. South of the border, it was a little bit in the other direction. We had slightly more people agreeing with the idea of having nuclear weapons rather than disagreeing. But the truth is, on both sides of the border, this is an issue that raises passion on both sides, and both countries are divided. It's just simply that in Scotland, the balance is tilted slightly in one direction and south of the border the other. So that's point one. On the issue of principle, we asked the same question on both sides of the border. We then went on to try to say to people, well, hang on, what do you think should happen if Scotland votes yes? And we didn't ask the same question because in part we didn't necessarily we didn't think actually the issue that faces the people on two sides of the border the same question. And we secondly didn't also reckon we could assume that people in England and Wales actually knew that Britain's nuclear weapons facility was located on the Clyde. So north of the border, we simply said to people, do you agree or disagree that if Scotland becomes independent, that it should be allowed to keep its weapons on the Clyde? South of the border, we introduced it by saying, look, actually, Britain's nuclear weapons facility is located on the Clyde. Do you disagree that they should stay there? Now, what you then discovered was that so far as the first question was concerned in Scotland, we basically got an even balance. We had very slightly more people saying they should stay than saying that they should go. South of the border, we had a very strong majority saying they should go. Now, whatever the argument about wording, I think the fundamental thing you have to understand is this. If you then look at the relationship between these two questions, what you discover is that north of the border, indeed, the people who think that Scotland should require nuclear weapons to go are the people who disagree with the principle of Britain having nuclear weapons. In other words, removing the missiles from the Clyde is an issue which is something that anti-nuclear people support north of the border. South of the border, the people who were saying we think the nuclear weapons should go were the people who agree with the principle of Britain having nuclear weapons. And I don't think that people should be surprised about this. The truth is that what actually people we're discovering is that actually people south of the border saying who are in favour of nuclear weapons say, well, actually, if Scotland votes independent, we shouldn't leave them there. We actually want to bring them home.
But I suppose just to focus it right in, just before we leave this, the question was actually about best practice and methodology. And it would seem that you got, for Scotland, if you just focus on Scotland, contradictory responses which were surprising. I know you're saying it's slightly one way and slightly the other, but that in itself makes it surprising because they contradict each other. So what I'm asking you is, would it not have been best practice just to have used exactly the same wording so there could be no ambiguity at all?
No, because the point is the question that faces the two countries is different. The question that faces Scotland is, should we insist that the nuclear weapons should go? The question that faces England and Wales is, do we want to try and keep them there or not?
Okay.
There are different political questions, and we were asking the voters, the potential voters in those two countries, the questions that their politicians will be faced with in the event of a yes vote, and they're different questions.